a bit of background available to you. But I'd like you to keep this example in mind and think about what you'd like to do. I have other scenarios that we'll also discuss, and like Brother Nazmal said, feel free to raise your hand. I'd like to make these more interactive than me just talking for an hour, even though I like to hear myself speak. I can understand it's probably sometimes a little bit boring to just hear one person talk at you for an hour. So here is a scenario to keep in mind.
Typical. Stuck in a tunnel. Hey, do you know the time?
It's 2:27.
Wow, you have pretty good English. Did you learn that in your home country?
No, actually, I was born here. I was born in Toronto, so.
Then why are you wearing that thing on your head? What do you guys call it? Like a punjab?
A hijab. Hijab.
Okay, well, we're in Canada now, so you don't have to wear that. Okay, we don't oppress women and children here, so I don't know why you put that thing on your head. Did your husband make you wear that? Yeah, you gotta walk 20 paces behind him.
I really don't want to have this conversation right now, so thank you.
Can you believe that? I'm trying to educate this woman. She's not even listening to me. Oh, great, now you're covering your head too. Great, why don't we all cover our heads, everyone? Let's cover our heads in Canada. It's not as bad as some of your friends, though. You know, the ones that cover everything. They look like Batman. They're like, right? The whole big thing and the, oh, bye, Chiquita Perone. You know, this is why we don't like you people. I'm trying to talk to you, and you're just being blatantly rude to me. Hey, now you're listening to your headphones. Okay. Yeah, what are you listening to? You listening to that music of yours? Habibi, Habibi. Or maybe your ISIS propaganda. Is that what you're listening to? Hey, miss, watch out. She's going to bomb in that bag. She's going to blow us all up. Oh, yeah, okay, walk away from me. Look, I'm talking to you, okay? What are you going to do? Put Sharia law on me? You're going to chop off my head? Look at me. Look at me!
So that was a scenario that we'll discuss at the end. It's a common scenario. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of similar situations or even seen situations like that on, for example, the subway. So let's start with some key terms. Human rights. What are human rights? Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of what's called grounds, certain grounds that include race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or other status. The context of which each of these fall under which ground changes depending on the context, but these are, some basic grounds. Discrimination is unequal treatment that is against the law. So for example, if one of your human rights have been violated based on one of these grounds, that's what we call discrimination. That can include both direct discrimination. So for example, if there was a restaurant that refused to serve Muslims, that would be direct discrimination and infringement upon Muslim people's human rights. And it can also be indirect. So for example, if there was a policy at a workplace that there is no headwear at the workplace, that would be discriminatory towards, for example, hijab wearing women or Sikh men who wear turbans. So while that policy may not appear to be on its face discriminatory, it has an indirect discriminatory effect. And both these types of discrimination are protected against in Canada. So as I said, there are various grounds upon which human rights are protected. Here are some of the basic grounds across all the human rights codes in Canada. They do differ slightly from province to province and the Canadian Human Rights Code, but essentially these are the main ones. One that we might want to pay attention to that's specific to Ontario that isn't listed here is an individual cannot be discriminated against because of their citizenship status or ancestry. So this, for example, would play into the context of requiring, for example, citizenship for a job could be a form of discrimination. So you may be asking what's going on with Quebec. I remember when I took constitutional law in first year of law school, the professor said, chances are if something doesn't make sense in constitutional law or human rights law in Canada, it's probably because of Quebec. It's probably a little bit discriminatory against the Quebec law, but that was the statement that he made. So some of you might have heard of Bill 21 out of Quebec. It's essentially a bill that does not allow the wearing of religious symbols in the provision of government services. So for example, a hijab wearing woman or a Jewish man wearing kippah would not be able to be, for example, a public school teacher or a crown prosecutor in Quebec. Now, NCCM, the organization that I mentioned at the beginning, along with another organization called the CCLA, have launched a legal challenge against this bill that's working its way through the courts. So let's drill down into Islamophobia. So Islamophobia would be considered a type of discrimination based on religion specific to Muslims. And the definition given by the Ontario Human Rights Commission of Islamophobia is stereotypes, bias, or acts of hostility towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general. Islamophobia can take the form of individual acts of discrimination or violence against Muslims or those who are perceived to be Muslim. Islamophobia can also produce systemic targeting or exclusion, as well as structural obstacles to equal opportunity for Muslims in employment, education, housing, and other areas of public life. So this is a question that we should probably reflect on throughout the context of this presentation. How might Islamophobia, or another term for it, anti-Muslim hate, show up in your daily life or work? And like I said, we'll go through some. Another piece to remember is that Muslims are not a monolith. We often experience oppression or discrimination at the intersection of various identities. So for example, if someone is being discriminated against for being, for example, a Somali hijab wearing woman, there could be multiple layers of, or intersections of which they are being discriminated against, both being a woman, being Black, and being Muslim are potential grounds of discrimination, and there could be more. So these are the rights and where they apply that we'll go through in this presentation. So my rights at work while accessing services, as a student with RCMP and CSIS, and when faced with Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hate. So my rights at work.
No, I don't.
This is just some helpful background before we dive into what the rights are at work. This is some data from 2016 that shows that Muslim immigrants are much more likely to have an annual income below $20,000 a year than those of other religions who immigrated to Canada. Their numbers at around 29%. Why does this matter? Because this is a context that may be a background towards other forms of discrimination. A lot of the times, poverty or class is a hidden ground, but a very important ground of discrimination against individuals.
Nothing better. There is, do it right.
Abbas, sorry. To all the participants, can you please mute yourselves? Thank you. Sorry, Abbas, continue.
No worries. So religious accommodation. Your rights at work require what's called a religious accommodation. That's an adjustment to the work environment that will allow an employee or an applicant, so you don't even have to be an employee at the time, but you can be going in for an interview or on your resume. It allows you to practice your religion. There is a bit of a limitation on it. You're only required to give religious accommodation up to the point of what's called undue hardship. Undue hardship is a legal test that considers the cost and health and safety implications of accommodation. These combined are known as like the duty to accommodate. So what are some examples of human rights in the workplace? You can request accommodations for example, prayer time, prayer space, a place for storing your prayer mat, time and space to perform wudu, maybe time off for Jummah, time to break your fast or to open your fast or even to start your fast, depending on the hours that you keep at your job. You time off for religious holidays, and even including Hajj, exemptions to certain dress codes if necessary, and exemptions from handling certain foods. I know that a lot of this is probably the most common area that I've seen for human rights and the interaction in Canada. I've taken advantage of several of these rights, including, prayer time and a prayer space at work. I remember when I was a kid, around 16 years old, I worked at Wonderland, and I kept a beard. I've been keeping a beard for maybe since the 9th grade. And it was a requirement because I was handling food for me to cut my beard, but I had brought in a letter asking for an accommodation, and the employer was amenable and accommodated that request. So how do you go about making a religious accommodation request? Make a clear request. Keep it written. If you're making just a subtle passing comment towards your boss, they may not understand that you're asking for a religious accommodation. If you're being shy and coy and wink wink nudge nudge, maybe I want to go pray, it's not very likely that you're going to get that accommodation. But if you keep a clear written record, for example, like an email to your HR department or to your boss saying, I'd like to request 10 minutes out of the day to go and pray, and a quiet space to do so, that written record is very helpful. Give your employer some reasonable amount of time to respond to your request. It can't be 5 minutes before lower time ends, and then you're suddenly just asking a request. And give them some time and allow them to come to that accommodation. If it requires making space in your particular workspace, then you have to give them time and space to do so. Be flexible, realistic, and cooperative, and offer suggestions. So the duty to accommodate applies to employers to the point of undue hardship. There is also a requirement for reasonable accommodation on the part of the employee. You can't necessarily expect you can't expect undue hardship. You have to kind of work in a reasonable manner with your employer to come to an accommodation. So it's really about, the law is really trying to get at some, employers and employees to be reasonable on a case-by-case basis. And then at the end, try and ask for a written decision. So this is something that you can, if your boss changes, you can show it to your, your next boss. Look, my previous boss granted me, this, 10 minutes out of the middle of the day to go and pray. So, this is something that I was doing, and I'd like to continue doing that. And also, if it was denied, denied and you've gone through the formal channels and you have that in a written record, it may be the point where you can make a human rights claim to, for example, the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. And if you have a written record of that, it's easier to make that evidence your request. So what to do if you believe you've been discriminated against in the workplace? So try to remain calm and respectful. Keep documentation of that discrimination. Like I said, if it was an accommodation request that had been denied, ask for that in writing or request a C decision. You should consider reporting the discriminatory action. So for example, if you are in a unionized environment, you can report it to your union. If you believe it's on the basis of Islamophobia or on the basis of you being a Muslim, you can contact the NCCM. And the NCCM, actually, I can tell you that they have like a whole human rights department, which is dedicated towards resolving or assisting in resolving disputes like this. Some employers also have an anti-discrimination policy, which may allow you to file a complaint under that policy and work your way up the chain of command. I'd recommend not signing any documents or resigning without speaking to a lawyer. There may be various employment and human rights laws at play that a lawyer can help advise you on. Okay, so let's do a case study. So Bilal is a young man who's been working at Subway for the last 3 months. At a team meeting, his manager announces that next month's special is going to be the pulled pork sub. After the meeting, Bilal lets his employer know that he's uncomfortable handling pork due to his religious beliefs. Bilal's employer gets annoyed and tells him that no one gets special treatment, just deal with it or leave. So if we can open up the, you can use the chat box or just raise your hand and maybe I can get to you, but what are Bilal's options? Anyone want to wager a guess? He has no options? Out of luck, quit your job?
Call NCCM.
Yes, that is an option. Call NCCM. So it looks like this is on the basis of his being a Muslim. He doesn't want to handle pork, which is haram. So you could call the NCCM. In my experience with cases like this is very common. A lot of the times employers, especially smaller employers or franchisees, they may not fully understand employment law or human rights law, and it may just take a little bit of education. NCCM can assist with that, but you can also do it yourself if you feel comfortable. So Subway may have some sort of anti-discrimination policy that Bilal can reference when speaking to his employer, or he can even contact the NCCM, or even help with another employee to help him. For example, an HR person. So next, my rights when accessing services. So here's an interesting real world example. It's a story of a Somali woman named Hamida Ahmed. She went to a Dunkin' Donuts and was chatting with her family, and for some reason she wasn't being served. She asked what was happening, and the server told her to stop yelling. So she complained that she wasn't yelling. Her family were having a conversation in the background. And in fact, she was speaking Somali language. The employee threatened to call the cops, so Hamida decided to ask for the manager, who called her a derogatory term and called the police. She decided to stick around and figure out what the fuss was all about and vouch for herself, but ended up leaving because she was told that she was trespassing. So this is an interesting example because we can consider, the different types of discrimination that Hamida faced. So as you can see here in the picture, she's a hijab-wearing Somali woman. So as I mentioned before, the grounds upon which one may be discriminated against are not always completely clear. As I said before, Muslims are not a monolith. There's various grounds upon which Hamida could have been discriminated against. For example, it was because she was a woman, because she was Black, because she was Muslim, because she has a different ethnic origin, or maybe on her citizenship status. There's various grounds, all of which would be protected grounds when accessing services. So like I said, you have the right to be given equal and fair treatment when accessing services. You cannot be refused goods or service on human rights related grounds. A common example that keeps popping up is the niqab example, like we discussed in Quebec. In Quebec even, and outside of Quebec and the rest of Canada, you cannot be asked to remove your hijab when accessing most government or commercial services or purchasing goods. Businesses cannot also ask for information based on these protected grounds for the purpose of engaging in a discriminatory business practice. There may be certain situations where a business can seek this information. For example, on the basis of sex, if it's like a women's only club, they can ask if you're a woman because that's tied not to discrimination based on human rights discrimination, but based on the provision of their services. So next, your rights as a student. So another case study. Miriam is in her final year of her engineering degree. When the exam schedule for the year is released, she notes that her final exam is scheduled for the same day as Eid. Miriam informs her professor about the conflict. The professor notes that the exam is only 2 hours and she can't do anything if it falls on the same day as the religious holiday. Let's just assume that Miriam can tell the future more than 2 days in advance and figure out the day of Eid. What can she do in this situation? Again, feel free to chime in if anyone believes they may have an answer. No? Okay, so generally, in my experience with educational institutions such as universities, they tend to be quite sophisticated and have pretty good policies relating to human rights. And they may even have a policy relating to this specific issue of religious accommodation of certain days during the exam period. Miriam can look for that kind of policy and then make a complaint under that policy or contact an organization like NCCM or even speak to the professor directly. An interesting point to note is that human rights are done in Canada on a case-by-case basis. So for example, if Miriam makes the request for an accommodation and is granted the request for accommodation to write the exam on a different day, not on Eid, that doesn't necessarily always directly apply to every Muslim, but applies to Miriam specifically because she made that request. So for example, if Miriam is Shia and she wanted to request Ashura off to attend Ashura commemorations, that would apply to her specifically, not to all Muslims directly or even all Shias because they have to make that request. They're done on a case-by-case basis. So more broadly, on campus, there are various rights that are protected. You have the right to openly express your religion and your religious identity. You have the right to wear religious symbols and attire. You have the right to organize student-led prayers up to a certain point that doesn't affect safety and health or safety. You have the right to request religious accommodations to, for example, attend Friday prayers or, for example, a prayer space. In my experience going to university at U of T, they were pretty good at having several spaces available for prayer space and to do wudu and making accommodations for religious holidays. You also have the right to request accommodations for athletic uniforms. So for example, if there are certain uniforms that a certain Muslim person would not feel comfortable wearing based on their religion, you can ask for accommodations based on those athletic uniforms. Like I said, educational institutions generally do accommodate students. They tend to be sophisticated, but it's done on a case-by-case basis and tailored to an individual's needs. However, at an institution, there tends to be a lot of people that may require certain accommodations. So, you know, universities are pretty proactive. Like I said, they create prayer spaces and things like that, or multi-faith centers where people can exercise their religious freedoms. So if you are facing discrimination or considering facing discrimination on campus, there are several different types of support or resources on campus, including student unions, multi-faith centers, anti-racism and cultural diversity offices. Like I said, again, these are sophisticated entities that have several supports available for students. So moving on to my rights with RCMP and CSIS. So let's begin with some quick key terms. There's a distinction between being arrested and being detained or being under detention. Arrest is when an individual is in police custody because they've been charged with this particular criminal offense. Detention is where an individual is being detained by the police. It means that the police have been given some reason to believe that they're obligated to stay and can't leave. It does not mean that you are specifically charged with a crime. If you don't know if you're being arrested or detained, you can ask. The simplest way to ask is, am I free to leave? And if they say yes, then you can walk away. There is very specific protections under our criminal law and the charter being applying to government action, police being government action, that are specific to the context of policing. But these are just some broad terms to consider. So what is the difference between CSIS and RCMP? CSIS is an intelligence service. That means it basically just gathers information. It has some more functions as well, but the main function being gathering information. It's a proactive measure. You can't be arrested or detained by a CSIS officer, and they don't enforce the criminal code. Whereas the RCMP is a form of police. It is reactive. You can be arrested or detained by an RCMP officer, and they do investigate crime and maintain and enforce law and order. This distinction matters in certain contexts when you're approached by whether it's CSIS or the RCMP, and your rights differ slightly with respect to the two, and we'll go through some of it briefly. So what can CSIS do? CSIS has specific threat reduction activities. They can do things like spread disinformation about you and interfere with your online presence, and they can interfere with your local and international travel plans. It sounds like it's moving beyond being proactive, and this is as a concern for civil liberties in Canada, and something that the NCCM has fought against, but they can at this moment in time do these things. If you are approached by a CSIS officer, or you believe you're being targeted by CSIS, you should consider contacting, you should contact a lawyer to determine your specific rights in your situation. And if you believe that you're being harassed by it, you can file a complaint with the director of CSIS, and of course you can contact NCCM. So the reason why we discuss national security in the context of Islamophobia is it's common that the Muslim community, and specifically Muslim students on campus, that get targeted by CSIS, Canada's spy agency. So this was a story from last year where this individual was targeted by CSIS, and this story came out detailing his interactions with them. This is an educated individual. I believe now he's an articling student, almost a lawyer. I believe I met him before. And unfortunately, he had a very negative experience with CSIS. The good thing is there is resources for students on campus. For example, there's been a CSIS help hotline that's been set up by NCCM in conjunction with other organizations on campus at U of T. I'm personally working on a similar one at Ryerson University, and I also understand that York University is setting up a similar hotline for students who are targeted by CSIS. So another example. Omar is entering his first year in engineering at the University of Ottawa. He's an exceptional student. He attends the first MSA welcome meeting of the year. The next day he is walking to the bus stop and a man approaches him. He claims to have a few questions and is from national security, quote unquote. He seems very friendly and invites Omar to meet him in a coffee shop. So which of the following are Omar's options under the law? Politely decline and refrain from answering any questions, tell the man to get lost, go for the coffee, call a lawyer, all of the above. So the answer is, I'll just jump through it to save time, is all of the above. You can do any of these things. CSIS can't force you to answer questions, but they tend to be very persistent, and if you do decline, they will tend to come back and ask you over and over again. So it's our suggestion that you politely decline and that say that you're going to speak with a lawyer and then actually reach out to a lawyer to ascertain your rights in the situation. And potentially, if you do have to meet with CSIS, you can meet with them with a lawyer. I remember when I was an undergrad years ago, there was an individual that, a friend of mine, that this did happen to him. He was approached by a CSIS agent. At the time, we didn't have the CSIS hotline. I remember he was quite nervous about that situation, but I believe our resources, especially within the Muslim community, have dramatically improved since then. And there are much more resources available to assist in matters like this. So what to do if you are arrested? Remember, again, CSIS can't arrest you, but the RCMP can. So if you get identified, if a RCMP officer identifies himself and puts you under arrest, what are your rights? First of all, don't try and resist arrest. It generally doesn't end very well. You do have the right to remain silent. This is not like the TV shows. It is a bit different in Canada. I know, there's that famous Miranda rights, it's called, in the US. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to, a lawyer. The rights in Canada are not exactly the same as the States, so don't rely on what you've seen on TV. Just remain silent and don't answer any questions until you've spoken to a lawyer and you have the right to a lawyer. If you have been arrested, police can search you and your clothing. Again, there's specific context to this. You can ask why, under what circumstances are you being searched, and you do not have to provide the police with passwords to your electronic devices. And you can ask for a lawyer if you're asked to do something more invasive, for example, like a strip search to determine your rights. So what happens if the police visit your home? You're not required to specifically answer their questions, and they can't enter your home unless they have a warrant or if there are urgent circumstances. You are allowed to ask under what basis they would like to enter your home and search your home. And if they don't have a warrant or don't claim urgent circumstances, you can deny them entry. I understand this is probably a very difficult thing to do in practice, but these are your rights. Police may confiscate illegal substances or evidence related to a crime that they see in your home. And you can ask them for their names and their badge numbers and ask them to provide those to you and contact a lawyer immediately. In most of my interactions with the police, even if it's something as routine as a traffic stop, I always ask for a name and a badge number. It's just good practice. And I also make sure that they understand that you are aware of your rights and you are aware of that this is a policing situation. Okay, another example. You're at home with your 2 children when the bell rings. You open the door and find 2 people at the door. They explain they're working with the RCMP and they want to take a look around your house as part of an investigation. You're surprised, but know they have nothing, but know you have nothing to hide, and invite them inside. So what are your rights in this situation? Like I said before, you have the right, you can let them inside if you'd like to, but you also have the right to request under what basis they would like to be let inside. There is a distinction if it was CSIS. If they identify themselves and provide documentation that they are CSIS officers, you can decline their ability to enter your home directly. They do not have the power to arrest or detain you, as I said before, for declining that. So what happens if you believe that law enforcement has violated your rights, or if you've been mistreated? For example, if they are abusive, if they swear at you, or if they violate your rights. Like I said, you can ask for their name and their badge number. You can write down the name and contact information of any witnesses. So if someone else saw the situation, you can take photos or videos with your, for example, camera phone. You can file a complaint to a specific police review board, or you can contact your provincial or territorial human rights office, or speak to a lawyer. And again, if it's on the basis of Islamophobia, but that you've been mistreated, you can contact NCCM for assistance. So what to do when faced with anti-Muslim hate? What is a hate crime? So a hate crime are criminal offenses committed against a person or property that has been based upon the victim's race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or any other similar factor. Hate speech is the incitement of hatred against identifiable group through public statements or advocating or promoting violence or genocide. These are slightly different than your rights under the code, under the various human rights codes. These are protected under the criminal code and pertain to policing situations. So these rise to the level of crime. So for example, if you were denied service at a certain restaurant or given poor service, on the basis of one of these grounds, it may not necessarily rise to the level of a crime under the criminal code, but it could be a violation of your human rights under a provincial or federal human rights code. So let's look at some statistics. In 2017, 41% of hate crimes were motivated by religion. And it found that also in 2017, hate crimes against Muslims in Canada went up 151%. While these numbers are very difficult to see, it's possible that these numbers are understated. And according to Statistics Canada, 2/3 of hate crimes go unreported. And between 2017 and 2018, hate-motivated mischief to religious property increased by 41%. So this is, for example, vandalism to religious institutions. So some of you may remember that in the past, our local mosque, the JCC, was vandalized by some graffiti, I believe. That would be considered a hate-motivated mischief to religious property. So what can you do in this situation? Let's say, for example, if you see someone vandalizing a religious institution. Try to remain calm and find a safer space. Document the incident and save evidence if you can. If you believe there could be a crime, you can report it to police and ask it be treated as a hate crime. And if it's on the basis of Islamophobia, you can contact the NCCM. I understand I've been saying that contact the NCCM quite a bit. There is reasons for this. They do track, beyond assisting you directly with whatever issue you're going through, they do track anti-Muslim hate incidents across Canada. This provides valuable data for both the community and law enforcement to see there's clusters to determine where, when, how these incidents are taking place. And are valuable for even, for example, research purposes. What can you do? So I've realized we're running short on time. I have about 5 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is just go back to that scenario with the video that I played at the beginning. And we'll come back to kind of what to do. But this is one response to what could be done in that situation.
Hey, do you have the time?
It's 2:27.
Wow, you have pretty good English. Did you learn that in your home country, or?
No, actually, I was born here. I was born in Toronto, so.
Then why would you wear that thing on your head? What do you guys call it? Like a punjab or a?
Hey,
Like
I think I know you. Aren't you Zara's friend?
Yeah, I am.
Hi.
Sarah, how are you
Excuse
doing?
me.
I'm Allie.
Yeah,
Hey.
yeah, I remember seeing you at that party that one time.
Oh,
Excuse me.
Yeah. Cheese platter was to die
You
for.
people are all the same.
For the rest of my life.
Hey,
I'm going to get coffee at the next stop. Do you want to come with?
yeah, that'd
Okay.
be great. Yeah.
Yeah. See you later. Good riddance.
So that's one example of what to do in a situation like that. There's no perfect way to deal with it. It's very contextually sensitive, but here are some tips to consider if you are encountered a situation like this. Try to figure out what's going on. This is important, but primarily you should maintain calmness and try and figure out if there's a safe way to figure out what's going on. You can distract the person who's perpetrating the violence if you are comfortable doing that, or if the context provides it. You can be direct. You can directly engage with the person perpetrating that violence or harassment, or you can be direct with the person that is on the receiving end of that discrimination, like the woman did in the video. You can try and delegate by getting other people involved. You can document the situation. You can pull out your phone and document it. And you can delay and wait till the situation is wound down or the perpetrator has left, and then provide support to the victim. A lot of the times in this situation, victims feel very alone. So a lot of this advice is about making sure that they're not alone and making sure that they feel supported and comfortable in these sort of situations. I do have a bit more, but I think this is a decent spot to stop and take some questions.
Review everybody.
So are there any questions?
Any questions, anybody? No questions. I have a couple. Abbas, I'll start with that, and hopefully there'll be more sort of when people get their thoughts together.
Okay.
What is the situation at the border? Normally, Canadian border agents are pretty friendly and welcoming, but on the other side, of course, we can't do anything. We just need to follow that. But at the border, are there any special things, any situations we should be aware of?
So the border is governed by CBSA. There are specific rules to engaging with the border. You do have the right to move to free movement. You're allowed back in your own country. They can't deny you access if you're a citizen of your own country, but that's probably like a broader discussion specific to that issue. And again, the charter would also apply to the actions of CBSA because that's a provision of government services. So they can't deny you access, for example, just on the basis of your ethnicity or your religion or things like that.
Right. I don't see any hands up. I don't see any chats.
Nazim bhai, I have a question. This is Masha.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, Abbas bhai, thank you. Very good, nice presentation, mashallah. I have just one quick question. You mentioned about food handling in Holland. You gave example of port, and you gave example of Subway. But I think in your example, you mentioned that they introduced something new while the person was already working there. So that may be a different situation, but what if somebody goes and work in a restaurant, for example, halal Chinese restaurant, but they also serve alcohol. So can I go and say, I'm willing to work here, but I won't handle alcohol. I won't serve alcohol. Is it my right?
Yes, yes, you're allowed to request that accommodation. And you can request it, at the time of interviewing for the job and just let them know. It's easier to be frank and upfront about these things. There's also the situation, which is more common than not, is that, for example, an individual changes their level of religiosity while working at a place. For example, a woman puts on hijab, halfway through working at a certain place, or you worked at a restaurant and you served alcohol, and then at some point you just, you feel uncomfortable with it, or, you go for ziyarat or hajj or something and you come back, enlightened, and you want to no longer do that. You can make that request at any time. All that's required is that it's a sincerely held religious belief. So those are definitely something that is protected.
So if I go for a job interview and I tell them this is the reason, this is my condition, accommodation I need, and if they say, no, we cannot hire you because you have to handle all kind of food, including alcohol, so they can do that?
It depends. Like it's very contextual. So, but if we play out this, for example, if you're going to apply for a bar and you say, I can't handle alcohol, probably good grounds that they can't hire you because, it's a bar with their job to serve alcohol. But if it's a restaurant and there are others available to serve that alcohol and they're just specifically not comfortable with you doing that, then there may be a reasonable accommodation requirement in that situation. So for example, if it's a restaurant and there are, 3 servers on staff all the time, 2 of which can handle the alcohol, 1 of which doesn't, it may be considered a reasonable accommodation to not require that 1 server to do so.
Fatima Sajan, go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Nazmul uncle, thank you for hosting today's session. And Abbas, assalamu alaikum, nice to see you. For those who don't know, Abbas, I've had the pleasure of working with him at the NCCM for the last 4 years. I serve as the manager of community engagement and development there. So thanks so much for doing this presentation, Abbas. Really appreciate it. For those of you listening, I just wanted to offer, if you're interested in following the work of the NCCM, I would encourage you to join our email list. Just so that way you can get an idea of the type of work we do, the type of issues we have our pulse on. Abbas mentioned Bill 21, and there's a number of other legal cases that we've taken on. So after the presentation, at some point, feel free to reach out to Nazmul uncle or Abbas or myself directly if you have my contact. But we'd love to have you guys join the email list and stay in touch with us, inshallah. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. Thanks for highlighting, what NCCM does. And it is important that we keep in touch with them to know what is happening out there as regards the Muslims, discrimination, any issues that come up in schools, in, the wider sort of workplaces and all that. Any other questions? If not, I know it is 5 o'clock, but Abbas, if I may just ask you to expand on something you said, that CSIS may spread disinformation. Can you explain that, please?
This is something that's a bit of a black box, even for lawyers that work in the space. I recently went to a discussion with one of the legal counsel at CSIS with a room full of basically a bunch of Muslim lawyers. It's not exactly clear how they've used this. They obviously didn't, explain, we did this in this certain situation, but they have powers of disruption. So for example, or they can spread, disinformation. If, for example, they see, I don't know, I'm giving an example just hypothetically, they see an ISIS recruiter on Twitter or something, they can spread information or even disinformation about that individual online. That seems to be one of the powers that they can do. Now, this sounds crazy. It is. It's not something that I believe is appropriate or is in line with our civil liberties and rule of law principles in Canada. But this is, the current state of the law, and there's not much information. At least I don't have specific information on these powers but it is an area of interest, and it is a little bit of it moves beyond CSIS's mandate as an information gathering organization into disruption, which seems highly, to me, inappropriate.
Is it enshrined in law or the practices, or is it written in kind of black and white, or is it something, one of the tactics used?
It is in law. I believe it was put in under Bill C-51, if you remember that the 2015 election with Stephen Harper. I believe that's when that was written into the law to give CSIS disruptive powers. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that that's where it stems from.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions, anybody? Okay, Kanis Kimji, you are asking something. At the airport, going through the security, sometimes they ask you to remove the scarf. Is this okay?
So you can ask for an accommodation for this. So for example, it's usually for security purposes. You can say, well, I can refuse. I'm refusing to remove my scarf unless you take me to a private room and get a female officer to require me to do that. Usually what they'll do is they'll just get a female officer to pat you down or run you through some sort of scanning machine. This is all to say, remember, this is for Canada. The entire presentation was Canada specific. If you're at an airport in a foreign country, the law may be different, but in Canada, this is kind of the state of the law. And from my experience, at least in Pearson, I have several family members who are hijab wearing women. They're generally pretty good about this matter. I don't know, I can't speak to obviously foreign countries.
Abbas, related to that, what's the situation on the passport photos or license applications? Are you obliged to take off the scarf if they ask you to?
No.
Niqab? No, they have, right?
I am unsure about niqab, to be frank with you, in the case of passport photos. Hijab, no. I definitely have seen many, passports with hijab wearing women. They've never seen them require you to take off a hijab for those photos. I'm not 100% sure on niqab, to be frank with you. There's arguments to be made on both sides. Generally, what I have seen, to be frank with you, when I have seen situations with niqab wearing women at the airport, they generally do get pulled aside, and a female officer will verify their identity. I haven't seen their passport, but I presume their passport is just them with hijab and not niqab.
Any other questions, anybody? So before we end, just a reminder, next week, next Sunday, same time, same place. That will be our last session, but an important session. Dr. Naushad Nurani will be talking about mental health. So please send in your questions by Tuesday, and hopefully we'll be able to cover those on the Sunday session. Abbas, really appreciate your help. You sort of highlighted a few areas, clarified a few things for us, and we are all that sort of more aware of what our rights are. And at the very least, we have a contact we can refer to if we have any issues. Thank you again. And
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for joining us. See you next Sunday. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.